I'm swayed by how Kurzweil used it. The term, I believe, goes back to the science fiction writer Werner Winge. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce his name. It was an engineer who wrote science fiction as the first one to use the word singularity in that context. Because normally, and in my game, singularity mathematically means you divide by zero, so the answer is infinity. That's what it means mathematically. And it turns out that if you look at Einstein's equations, Einstein predicted that at the beginning of the Big Bang or in the center of a black hole, you would get a singularity where space and time broke down because densities were going to infinity, basically. And so that's the common use of that phrase in my game. But what Kurzweil meant, so this is the definition I've adopted basically, is when you get machines, AI, all that kind of stuff, doing every task that a human being can do. And so it's gotten horribly, maybe that's not the right word, very competent.
Right.
And faster, ChatGPT and things that came after that. But AI is not conscious yet. It can do so much of what humans can do, and that's already hugely disruptive. Whether AI becomes conscious or not, it's clearly hugely disruptive.
We're going through something absolutely historic.
Technologies across the board are growing exponentially.
It's a disruption that's going to completely redefine the way businesses compete.
In the next decade, we're going to lose 40% of today's Fortune 500 companies.
The exponential growth of computing is continuing.
AI is nowhere near its full potential.
Whether you like it or not, that the future cannot be stopped by anyone.
Hi there, everybody. Welcome back to the Future Tech and Foresight podcast. This is going to be episode number 176. And today we are going to be looking a little bit further into the future compared to a number of the recent episodes which kind of deal with kind of modern day issues, modern day tech, still emerging, but kind of what's happening right now. This episode, we're going to look a couple years into the future. We've touched on the topic once or twice in the past. It is the technological singularity that we're going to be focusing on today. So I think Ray Kurzweil, which popularized the idea, put the singularity in the 2040s. So we're still a couple of years away, and that's the subject of today's episode. We also touch on whether, obviously, artificial intelligence is important in this discussion. So whether conscious AI is actually important for that or important in general. This is something that, of course, is constantly talked about. When are we going to reach conscious AI? And my guest today brings up an interesting question about whether that's even important or necessary. Obviously, whenever we're talking about the singularity, there's always questions about technological unemployment and where does human labor fit into it. So we discuss that in depth, and then spend a lot of time on brain-computer interface technology, so BCI, and how that is going to be changing the future, but also how it's going to be changing us, which is always a question that I think is at the tip of everybody's tongue or at the top of everybody's mind whenever we talk about BCI tech. So my guest today is J. Craig Wheeler. He is the Samuel T. and Fern Yanagisawa Regents Professor of Astronomy Emeritus at the University of Texas at Austin and a past chair of the department. A fellow of the American Physical Society and Legacy Fellow of the American Astronomical Society. He has published nearly 400 scientific papers, authored both professional and popular books on supernova, and written 2 novels. Wheeler has received numerous teaching awards and is a sought-after science lecturer. He has served on advisory committees for NSF, NASA, and the National Research Council, with research interest in supernova, black holes, and humanity's technological future, which is where he is relevant for today's discussion. He is the author of a new book, The Path to Singularity: How Technology Will Challenge the Future of Humanity, which he draws on strongly in today's interview, and is, I would say, a fascinating book for a fascinating discussion that we have today, and I hope that you all enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Hi there, Craig. Thank you very much for coming onto the podcast today. I've talked about, the path to the singularity or the problems with the singularity a couple times before. I don't think I've talked about it enough. So I'm really happy to have you onto the podcast to talk about this and all the kind of crazy things that are connected to it. Thanks for taking the time to talk about this today.
Yeah, look forward to doing it.
So I'll have already discussed in the pre-intro your bio. You're an astrophysicist, you're now talking about the singularity and artificial intelligence. How did you make that shift, or what got you interested in what we're talking about? I think that's a good place to kind of start the discussion before we jump into I would say, the crazy ideas that I'm sure we're going to talk about today.
Well, crazy but real.
Yeah.
And just to be totally clear, as you just said, I'm an academic. I don't come out of the business world where people are clearly engaged in AI. So I've got my own perspective on it. And in my case, the answer to your question comes from working with bright students. It turns out the University of Texas at Austin has a wonderful program called Reading Roundup. And it's where a professor will pick a book of some kind and advertise it to incoming freshman students, and then discuss that book with the students for an hour or two on the day before classes start. And the idea is just a way of getting, freshmen coming to campus for the first time introduced to the enormous state university, which we represent, 50-some thousand students.
Oh, shoot. Okay, that is big.
Very, very nice icebreaker, and it's fun to do, and I would do a different book every time, did it for quite a while. And besides being an astrophysicist, it came from that. But I got an interest in astrobiology, which is a hugely interesting interdisciplinary topic. And my entree in it was, well, suppose a supernova, which is what I really do. I work on supernova explosions, black holes, neutron stars, these things. If a supernova went off nearby, what biological action would it have on the Earth? Very interesting question, unresolved, depends on how far away the supernova was. But I got involved in a series of meetings in Washington where all the world's experts in astrobiology would come and talk and wrangle about things. Again, very interdisciplinary, and people trying to talk about their topics. And so that was also part of my thinking at the time. And I picked, one year I picked Darwin. And there's a little backstory there, if you'll let me tell it. I don't remember where I saw this, but I read about a preacher who said, I believe in evolution. I believe in biological evolution, but it is clear that Homo sapiens is the peak. We are it. And that made me think, I've never thought deeply about this, but I've just assumed that Homo sapiens are evolving under the pressures of natural selection, and what an interesting point of view. So I had the students read Darwin and then talk about this preacher's point of view. And we did a little, but the thing that really startled me was how much so many of the students, they're a small class, dozen people maybe, were already aware that we knew enough about biology through DNA, and CRISPR was not yet part of the news, but things like that were leading us to a case where we could affect our own evolution and not wait for Darwinian natural selection. So it was a fascinating conversation with me learning from the students, which is the right way to do it at some level.
Right.
And so I did that, and then I said, well, you might expand on this. This might make a course. And so I invented a very interdisciplinary course that was just barely astronomy, although I brought that perspective to it, great swaths of time and huge amounts of space, back to the Big Bang and forward and all that. And it turned out to be the most fun course I ever taught. I'm a pretty good teacher. I won prizes for it. But this was just opening up a whole garden of new ideas, some of them kind of scary and nerve-wracking. but really fun to teach. And so I did that for about 5 years. And by the end of that, I had a bunch of notes, and I retired. I said, well, let me see whether I can turn this into a book and organize it in a more coherent way. And that's kind of what led to us today. But it does all, in some sense, the pebble that started the avalanche went back to that preacher. I don't remember who he was. I don't remember where I read it. I wish I did. I owe him a copy of the book. But anyway, that's how I got into it. It's certainly from being a professor of astronomy, but also being interested in the world around us, just as a citizen of the country and the globe. And
Okay, very interesting. One question, because I don't think I've had an astrophysicist on the podcast, right? We touch on technology and business sometimes, so astrophysics is outside of the scope. But one thing that you mentioned sparked an idea in my mind. So you said that you're focused on large things like large distances, supernovas, obviously expanding, like massive explosions. Has that way of thinking helped you conceptualize the singularity? The reason I'm asking this, I first heard of the singularity, I want to say about a decade ago. I watched the documentary, I believe it's Singularity Man, the one which is kind of a following Ray Kurzweil, talking about the singularity and all his wacky ideas back then. But
yeah,
I was a little bit
wacky, my friend, not so wacky. Yeah. So
yeah. Well, wacky to, some oh, maybe it was more than 10 years. Anyway, some 20 something, 25, 26-year-old guy that hadn't thought about these large concepts before. So my question is astrophysics helpful in the size and the grandioseness of what you're thinking about every day, helping you with the scope of what the singularity kind of entails?
Well, so the answer is yes, I think, although I've had discussions with many people. I've had discussions with my agent about what was important that I was bringing an astronomical perspective. And some of the book is about astronomy. Much of it is not. But I can't help being an astrophysicist and having that perspective. And so in some sense, yes, of course it has to bring in, but particularly the fact that I'm very aware that we live in a 14 billion year old universe, live on a 5 billion year old planet, huge ranges of time that most humans just don't get their head around at all. It's everyday stuff for astronomers. This is how we think about it. And we're trying to figure out where it goes in the future. Right now, our best guess is that the universe expands ever faster forever. And that's kind of a sobering thing as well. But that swath of time is for an astronomer or for a geologist, for that matter, thinks in the same time scales of not just millions but billions of years. And so yeah, putting all these ideas of here we are, we live on this 5 billion year old planet. There weren't any Homo sapiens around a few 100,000 years ago. What's going to happen in the future? We're at an instant that may be a turning point. And I can make the argument for that. We can extrapolate on that a bit. So I'm trying to put it in that context, that there was this huge amount of time that passed, there's a huge amount of time in the future, and we're sitting here at one instant trying to get a grip on what's going on. It's a very special phase in human evolution. And so far, as we know, we're alone. It may be a special time for the whole universe.
Right.
That's a whole different topic.
Yeah. We don't need to get into. I believe it was. Yeah.
I think it's a very special epic, and so here we are. So the book is kind of, how did we get here? Where are we now? And where we have to go in the future.
Where we're going. Yeah. Well, I think it's very important to put all of this into context with a large span of time, because like I'm immersed in this all the time. I'm speaking to people that are immersed in not the singularity necessarily, but artificial intelligence and all the kind of emerging technologies that are coming out, and there's so much happening, right? So you can get kind of lost in the details of using this new tool or using this new software, or hey, testing this new thing with ChatGPT or whatnot. And it's very, very easy to lose track of, well, yeah, all of this has happened before, or all of well, this hasn't happened before, but all these other things have happened before, and this is where we are, and what's going to happen later. So I think it's great to have you on the podcast to talk about that.
I think society needs to step back and see the big picture. And so all those details are important. They're all feeding what's going on. And I just happen to think naturally in this somewhat broader way. So I'm not just defending myself. I think it is important to see the forest for the trees. And the trees are important, every little branch, absolutely.
Sure.
But you need to keep an eye on the forest, and the forest is changing very rapidly.
Yeah. Maybe one other thing I want to add to this discussion. I read the Second Machine Age, again, like a decade or longer ago now. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to read that wonderful book. In the very, I want to say, first 2 or 3 chapters, they make the argument that out of everything that humanity does, technology is the most important when it comes to changing civilization, society, right? So you can have, this is the argument that they make. I like it because I'm a techno guy, but so there's like, they talk about religion, they talk about wars, they talk about diseases, but it's only through technology that I think humans were kind of capped out at 500 million or 1 billion or even less than that. And it was only through the use of, agriculture and fossil fuels, et cetera, that we were able to, reach the staggering amount of people that we have on the planet now. And then all the kind of crazy things that have happened over the last, let's say, couple decades. I just want to throw that in there.
Yeah, no, I'm sympathetic to that argument that would I argue that technology is the dominant thing? Well, yeah, I could probably argue that, but certainly that the technology has been a driving force all along. So we're in this, and we talk about what this is, but exponential growth, a phrase that people throw around maybe a little too easily, but the fact is we're in something like exponential growth, which is very different than just plodding along, and I think that's been going on for a long time, and it's been driven by technology for a very long time. Back to agriculture, back to the first tools. That's all part of a continuum, as I see it. Slow at first, faster and faster and faster. You refer to the last 20 years. Well, you're young enough. Hang on, man. The next 20 years are going to be something else.
Yeah. Well, the only reason I threw that in there is because if, again, assuming the argument is correct, it just means that there's going to be not just a whole bunch of new technologies and things that we can do, but I'd say that the structure of society and civilization might actually change drastically.
Yes, and that's the arguments I make in the book. I think it's almost inevitable. The way things are falling. I mean, we can amplify that. But yes, absolutely.
Fabulous. Can you maybe start us off by defining what you mean by the singularity or how it's understood? Because I think there's multiple terms out there, and I've had a couple of people on, and they all kind of say different things. So I'm happy to have you just define.
Yeah, well, I am very biased by Ray Kurzweil. We used Kurzweil's original book, The Singularity is Near, as our textbook. He laid out a lot of the ideas. He puts the quantitative arguments behind it of, this thing's going exponentially, that thing's going exponentially, what that means. So there were, some things maybe more detail than we needed to know. I thought he wrote pretty well. Some of the students criticized that as well. But that infuses my consciousness. And now he's got this more recent book, The Singularity is Nearer. Right. And he's still basically saying, sometime around 2040 or maybe 2050, he's kept to the same target. And I don't know whether that's right. I think maybe it would be faster than that. But anyway, so I'm swayed by how Kurzweil used it. The term, I believe, goes back to the science fiction writer Vernor Vinge. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce his name. It was an engineer who wrote science fiction as the first one to use the word singularity in that context. Because normally, and in my game, singularity mathematically means you divide by 0, so the answer is infinity. That's what it means mathematically. And it turns out that if you look at Einstein's equations, Einstein predicted that at the beginning of the Big Bang or at in the center of a black hole, you would get a singularity where space and time broke down because densities were going to infinity, basically. And so that's the common use of that phrase in my game. But what Kurzweil meant, so this is the definition I've adopted basically, is when you get machines, AI, all that kind of stuff, doing every task that a human being can do. And so it's gotten horribly, maybe that's not the right word, very competent,
Right.
and faster, ChatGPT and things that came after that. But AI is not conscious yet. It can do so much of what humans can do, and that's already hugely disruptive. Whether AI becomes conscious or not, it's clearly hugely disruptive. Um, but if there does come this phase, and so I'm not saying it will, but you can see where things are pointing, and that's what defines that transition is finally when there's just nothing that humans can do that that a machine can't, and the question of how close are we to that? But that's my definition of singularity when the computers can do everything that we can do. And
Okay, perfect.
that's sort of equivalent to becoming conscious, but not necessarily. The consciousness is a hugely important topic, but not quite the same thing as the essence of the singularity.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, because I think a lot of people get stuck on this idea of, well, once AI is conscious, that's the singularity. Or once AI is conscious, that's the end of, the work that we do, or once AI, X, Y, Z.
Yep.
But I think this is a really good point that, AI doesn't need to be conscious to do a vast amount or to create a tremendous amount of disruption in the world that we live in right now, right? And I think I honestly think it's a little bit of a distraction, consciousness. But look at everything that we're able to do right now with, we've used ChatGPT a couple times. Just with ChatGPT, like, it saves a tremendous amount of time, and it's benefiting workers, but it's also, I would say, disrupting
Yep.
lots of people, right? Freelancers, et cetera, that used to do, copywriting, for instance, are not really required anymore.
So as we're talking about this, I realize I have developed my own. I hadn't quite realized this till you put the question just then. My own definition of singularity, which is slightly different, and it is my concern that because things are growing, technology is growing roughly exponentially, maybe not exactly, that we look back at the past of technology and the invention of agriculture or the Industrial Revolution, and people argue that the latter, for instance, Industrial Revolution, was a kink in the curve, and all of a sudden things went ever faster. And I don't think that's the right way to look at it. I think this exponential growth of technology has been going on all along. It starts off rather slowly, but it doubles every whatever. And yes, it led to the Industrial Revolution, and there was a little wrinkle in the curve there then. But it's just the Industrial Revolution, in my perspective, was just part of this overall
Part of it.
ongoing development, and that we shouldn't look back and make too much of that, because look what's happened since then.
Yeah.
And so we keep marching along, but through all of that, or the invention of the automobile, the displacement of horse and carriage, and all the things that happened since then, individual humans and society have been challenged, but they have more or less been able to respond to those things. And my concern is we're now going to get to a qualitative new phase, whether AI is conscious or not, a qualitative new phase where things are happening so fast that individuals and societies cannot keep up. And that will be a qualitatively new phase of humanity, is what I've called it to myself and in the book. But I'm realizing now with this conversation, that is basically my definition of singularity. And it may turn out to be identical to AI becoming conscious, but it's a little different. And it can happen without the consciousness. We'll just be overwhelmed. And that the state of overwhelm, it's may very well be imminent. I don't know whether I will live to see it, but I'm pretty sure you will.
Yeah, well, you never know. Life's full of chaotic surprises. Yeah, I would agree with that definition. That's a little bit closer to mine as well. It's not just because also people tend to focus so much on artificial intelligence. It is the topic du jour, right? So there's
Well,
the reason
it's
to
very
focus on it.
important, and it's one of many.
It's one of many. Yeah, you can talk about robotics, which is of course connected to AI, but it's separate as well. You can talk about biotech. You can talk about space technology. Like there's all these sorts of things, and I would say it's pretty much impossible right now to keep up with absolutely everything. But at least you can kind of get a sense of where things are moving. I think when we talk about the singularity, it's like a new type of chat GPT is coming out every week or something like that, right? And it has the potential to radicalize and disrupt entire industries, kind of maybe not every week, but every month or something like that, or you know every day, right? And that's at the point where it's absolutely impossible to really keep up with what's going on. And then to infuse the conversation with something that I think we wanted to get to later, like humans then need to merge with technology if they have any chance of keeping up with it, right? And I think that's the thing that people are really, I'm scared about it. I'm concerned about it for all, reasons that we might want to get into. But I think that's kind of where people are like, okay, this is sci-fi. I don't want to hear about this. This is crazy, and they kind of walk away from these sorts of ideas, unfortunately.
Yep. But you touch on a point that's also close to my heart and kind of what the book is about. So my book rambles a bit, but it's because I felt it was so important to not just talk about AI or not just talk about genetics or not just talk about brain-computer interfaces or not just talk about the space program, that all of those things are going to be racing ahead over the next 20 years. And it's part of the human condition to try to focus on one paranoia and one anxiety at a time. But the fact is, all that's going to be happening, everything, everywhere, all at once. And how you cope with that, I don't know. But you start by having conversations like this and raising awareness and noticing things and trying to think about what do we do about it, and putting concrete. Here's what I recommend. Point 1, 2, 3, 4. That's tough. But first you enunciate the issues, and podcast is doing a good job of doing that. And I'm happy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not just mine, but there are lots of them out there that touch on these ideas. And yeah,
I thought you.
yeah.
You're doing a good job. Thank you very much.
Well, again, thanks for coming on. Could we touch on some of the disruptions? The first 100 episodes of this podcast, I rebranded, but it used to be called Automated, and it was all focused on technological unemployment. So how humans are being replaced by, or potentially replaced by, XYZ technology. I tried to touch on all of them. How do you see labor being impacted by the technological unemployment? I mean, you already touched on it by the singularity. You already touched on it at the beginning, but that's kind of like the end state of the singularity. How do you think things might, transition over the next, let's just say 20 years, and how it refers to labor? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I have tried to think about that. I've written about it. I don't know whether I have any unique new insights, because a lot of people thought very much about it. Very complicated issue. There are some people that think, well, we will retrain, but I think that's a temporary solution with AI or something that's racing ahead exponentially. So I'm not sure quite what to do about it, but it is certainly part of the challenge. Do we invoke universal basic income to try to redistribute things a bit, and then what would life be like if we had that kind of thing? Expensive process, but there's a lot of money kicking around that could help support that if it were redirected. So yeah, I worry about that. I've addressed it. I don't have any. Again, here's what I recommend. Point 1, 2, or 3. I think it's more complicated than that. But you can't take coal miners in West Virginia and never mind turn them into neurosurgeons overnight. You can't even really easily turn them into people who can help build solar panels. Right. And that amount of retraining is You can think about that and work toward it, but I don't think there's any magic wand there as this displacement proceeds. But why we need to have the conversation, we may need to have some new regulations, we may need to have some new policies. I mean, it starts by recognizing the issues and talking about them and even speculating about them. I think, speculation could lead you off into wild territory, but I do some of that in the book. I think it's important to speculate to help lay out the map of where we might be going so we can say, let's not go there. Let's try going here instead. And we've seen this social media kind of run away from us right now, as you were talking with Mark Weinstein, that he was a little glib about, well, we could redo that. But it's one thing to say that, and I believe it, and I'm delighted he's thinking about it. But implementing that change when the big companies that are doing the surveillance capitalism are in control right now, they're not going to just roll over and let that happen.
Yeah.
And of course, we've just had this election, and one of the things I recommend is vote and then keep the pressure on your representatives. But there was very little discussion of these issues that you and I are concerned about now in the election. And I understand that because there's, you're trying to win the office and you boil it down to the basic things and what my base wants and what their base wants. But I think it was regrettable that these topics that you and I are talking about now weren't raised in this last election.
Yeah. 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 We can touch on that for an entire podcast. Yeah, let's try and avoid it. It's I'm up here in Canada, and I'm still getting bombarded by all the news about the election, and I try to stay away, but it is addicting.
Forgive me for raising.
No,
I'm happy to stay away from it.
no problem. I think the algorithm would like it, but I don't do this podcast just for the algorithm. Okay, going back to the disruption in labor thing. One thing that I've always been very concerned about, if we're talking about retraining, is if you reach, again, assuming the singularity is true, which I think we both completely agree that it is, and that the rate of change is going to keep increasing. If you say retrain for a coal miner to code or something like that, by the time they're ready to code, assuming they can, by the time they are proficient coders, coding is already obsolete and done by ChatGPT. Right? There was this glib response on the internet a couple of years back where I think it was truck drivers were complaining about autonomous vehicles, and how they're going to start replacing their jobs, obviously. And then there were some, shitheads on the internet saying, well, just learn to code, right? Just train.
Too simplistic.
Yeah. And I think it turned into a hashtag, and there was some discussion about it. And I might be remembering the event a little bit incorrectly, but I think the underlying idea is what we want to talk about, right? There's this: if you lose your job because it gets literally replaced by technology, well, then just go learn a skill. Now, this learn to code hashtag movement, trend, whatever you want to call it, happened a couple of years before ChatGPT came out. And now, I've had a couple guests on the podcast that are programmers, and they are a little bit mixed, but there is at least some concern that coding might be replaced by an AI of the future, right? In the next couple of years, not in 10 years or something like that. Some are completely against the idea. But I guess the point here is, okay, you have truck drivers that then go learn to code, and then an AI comes out that replaces code. Now they're then forced to retrain again, right? And then what? The next thing they're going to be trained on is also going to be replaced by, some other AI or some other software tool like that. So this deep concern that I have about this idea of retraining is that it's a never-ending loop, and then people will never really be able to have a career or job that lasts more than 6 months. Right? Or a year, which but before I started my business, I had to search for many jobs, and it's demoralizing, right? It's demotivating.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't want to ramble too much, but that's the general gist of.
I think you're on the right track there in my mind that I think retraining will serve some purposes for some people, but I don't think it's a robust solution to the challenge coming down the pike. At that point, having enunciated that, I don't know what the robust solution is. Coming back to universal basic income, when I raised the question in my class and talked about that, well, suppose you, and it's like 30 students in the class, had this universal basic income, what would you do with it? And half the class, and I'll let you guess which half, said, I'd play Fortnite.
Right.
But, that's not what's it was the male half, of course. That's not what's going to happen. But if you do support people by just, giving them that welfare or something, they're accusations that will just undermine you and you'll just lay around and play Fortnite. I don't think that's what will happen. And there's data showing that no, people use those resources in their own personal, fruitful ways, and it could be a healthy thing. But that's this is one piece of this whole school of things that it flows back into human psychology and whatnot. That I think that there may be some good come out of that, but just simply recoding is that, or learn to code is. I don't know, there's a little bit of a sideways, but there are people who are wired to code.
Sure.
I've worked with some of them. Their brains just work that way. And I'll tell you, I'm not one of them.
Yeah.
And I've got two sons. One of them is kind of wired that way, and the other's an artist. And he's just, he can code at some rudimentary level, but then you see somebody who was just born to do it, the natural hackers of the world. You can't just take any person off the street, and you can teach a lot of them to code. And I think we should do that. And students should learn coding in grade school. I think all those are good things. But the fact that code can code, that's a different animal. I'm sorry. And that's out of the box. It's not perfect yet, but it's coming.
Let's shift gears here. I'm realizing we're almost done the time that we've had allotted, and there's like 20 other topics that I want to get to.
All right, I'll try to stop rambling. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Well, I think that the conversation is so large, it's impossible to do it all in one podcast. Let's dive into brain-computer interface technology a little bit here. The questions that or the topics that you sent me before, there was a lot of ideas about ethics and morals and, guardrails that we need to put on AI and things like that. How do you think about brain-computer interface, or BCI tech, as kind of a necessary evil maybe in the next 20 years or so? And then, like, will we stop being humans? And like, what are the ethics around this? Like, is this I have so many questions about this. It's still, for me, kind of a flabbergasting topic to consider, because there's, what happens if an evil corporation, Neuralink turns evil or something like that, and starts controlling people's minds, or forcing people to have ads come up on their vision all the time, or like all sorts of wacky ideas. But
I'm sorry, not wacky ideas, man. That is exactly the ideas you think when you start contemplating. So I've written about that. I've thought about it a fair amount. Not engaged in it at all. So this is a secondhand concerned citizen opinion. I do have kind of the impression that there's not enough discussion about this, but as I've thought about it, I've realized there is a lot of discussion. So it's not like it's zero.
Yeah.
But I think it is under considered. So for just all the reasons you just said, that we can certainly read minds now. It's catalyzed by AI being able to interpret the neural signals coming out. So AI is a critical part of this, but it's more complicated. It's got human brains involved. That you could now understand those signals and use them to drive prosthetics. That's a great thing to do, but it's not limited to that. I could control a cobot on the moon by thinking, once this technology is in place, and it is. And then if you can go the other way and implant signals, and that's a more rudimentary technology. The stuff I know particularly about is a program at MIT that I just read about. implanting signals. And then once you can get it two-way, then you're basically doing mental telepathy. And that just opens up an entire new thing of, privacy and how do we control what we're thinking? How do we control what somebody else knows about what we're thinking? What company is in charge of that and storing the data on all of our thoughts? All those things you raised, just immense issues there, I think, that really need to be thought about and some kind of regulations put in mind or something like that. So my tagline on that is, I think this is inevitable.
Yeah.
Because technology just does this. It's sweet technology. It's profitable technology. It's it's going to go forward. But I'm delighted to have this conversation with you. This is my tagline. But I don't really want to know what you're thinking, and I don't really want you to know what I'm thinking. It's very old-fashioned of me, but that's a very strong feeling. And so the privacy issues is just whether we develop a hive mind that we're all sharing the same Borg-like perspective to things. I think I see amongst the people promoting BCI, I see very little discussion of that. So I'm glad that you're cataloging all these issues that I see. I think we need much more discussion about that and, how fast we go and,
Yeah, and the thing that's a little bit concerning is that this already works with people, right? I think it was Joe Rogan 3 months ago or something like that had Neuralink's first human patient on the podcast discussing how it's changed his life, and because he's completely paralyzed and he uses the implant to I think he was talking a little bit about how he plays video games and how he's actually better than how
that's
got a mouth.
exciting stuff. Absolutely.
It's great. But this is the concern, right? It's so exciting, so people just jump on board onto it now. It's not like everybody's going to get brain implants in the next couple of years. I think it'll take a decade or longer before people really start. The safety has to be there in place first. But my main concern is, where's my cell phone? So we're using this thing. And think about how bad the privacy issues are with just social media and just cell phones. Like this is at arm's length. I can throw this away if I want. I don't, but if it's literally in my brain and connected to my brain, like we need to get social media and cell phone privacy and all the issues that are connected to this done properly first before we start implanting these kinds of chips into our brain. And I don't think that's going to happen. I think we're going to have the same kind of problems that we have with our cell phones. And as you alluded to, substantially more when these chips get put into our brains.
I'm sorry that these ideas are weighing on your mind, but I'm also delighted. There's, people, smart people, caring people have to think about these issues. You can't just get caught up in the immediate hype. So good on you, sir.
Well, it's like because of people like you that come onto the podcast that force me to think about these things more than I want. But even though I love doing it, I don't know if we want to touch on guardrails. We have a question here. What guardrails are needed to keep humanity in control of technology? That's also something that is very, very much connected to this idea of the singularity when we have this runaway technology, right? The BCI is a little bit maybe more personal, whereas the guardrails and controlling AI, I think, is a little bit more of a civilizational level threat or civilizational level disruption. I needed to bring this one in before we end.
Okay, yeah, I think both of them are civilizational in my own estimate. So how you define those guardrails and how you implement them is, that's a tough problem because, democracies depict this, work at a certain sedate rate, and things are going to be happening faster than that. So can you do this through the legislative process? I think we have to. I think we have to try. But how we can implement that is very non-trivial. The best I can say is it starts by having the conversation and getting the issues on the table, and then see how that develops. But yeah, it may be that we have to merge with our machines, but then are we human anymore? And are we prepared to pay that price? I don't want to be a human anymore if I'm only going to have an AI overload. I want to share this with my AI overload. These are deep, hard questions, and I think I'd rather not go in that direction, but I can understand why some people would say, yeah, if this is what's required for me personally to live and prosper, and for my my shared humanity to live and prosper, this is what is required. I can imagine people doing that,
Oh yeah.
but it's very complicated.
Yeah. Okay, one final question here. And you just kind of touched on it. If we get connected to our AI overlords, or the all the kind of crazy technologies and sentient AI that's coming about, will we still be humans? Will we be some sort of neo-human, different category? Like what do you think? Also, maybe bring this right back to what we talked about at the beginning, right? This long time span of humanity, right? So, like, you and I are vastly different humans than our, agricultural or hunter-gatherer ancestors, right? Now, we're still Homo sapiens, but I think that there's a categorical difference between how I function in the world and how my, great, 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 great grandfather functioned in the world. Um, is it going to be the same kind of difference, or is the difference going to be structurally different that um, will need a new kind of term, and we won't really be humans anymore?
Mhm. Um, this is worth a whole podcast
Yeah, yeah.
on its own. So let me try to say quickly. So we're kind of focusing on the AI and the computer-driven stuff, but what's coming out of biology, our capacity to change our own DNA structure and therefore design our own evolutionary future, is another revolution that's coming down the pike just as fast as AI, and AI is coupled into it at some level. So I think one of the statements that I make in the book, again, a bit of a teaser, is there were no Homo sapiens on this planet 1,000,000 years ago, even more recent than that. And and this is part of my astronomer's perspective, I am absolutely convinced there will be no Homo sapiens on this planet 1,000,000 years from now. And there's 3 reasons. One, ordinary Darwinian evolution. There weren't any Homo sapiens 1,000,000 years ago, and I don't see any reason for that to stop. We could nuke ourselves overnight. Putin's rattling his weapons again. I don't think he's gonna do anything. Or we can alter our own evolution, and it could be merging with machines, or it could just be tinkering with our DNA. But I think we are gonna drive our own evolution just because it's maybe necessary, it's a sweet thing to do, I can make money from it, that's gonna happen. So I think Homo sapiens will not be here, and I don't think it's 1,000,000 years. I think it's much faster than that. Or we go into space and we're suffused with radiation, and we need to evolve to live in that environment or something. So I think my answer is no, we're not gonna be here as Homo sapiens for a whole variety of reasons that might influence it. I don't know which one's gonna be the dominant one, but that's certainly my perspective. Can I say one more quick thing?
Yeah, yeah,
About
please.
aging. No, about
Yeah.
aging. So there's people in the biology trying to solve the aging problem, and that's a wonderful thing to try to do. I don't wanna die. I don't want you to die. We should all live forever, but there's huge sociological implications if you do that. Having things die off is how we regenerate and regrow.
Mm.
My tagline on that is, what do we do with the babies if the old folks don't go away? And I think that, the people promoting, solving the aging problem, I see very little discussion of what the sociological implications of that would be. And I think they're also vast and worth thinking about and speculating about and putting guardrails in place and all the things we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, on that, so I've thought about that a lot because I like the idea of living forever, exploring the universe or the solar system and the air.
Guy.
Yeah. But
I'm serious.
but that's exactly
That is a kind of a selfish perspective.
exactly. But that's exactly the point, right? Like the whole longevity movement, it attracts you because of your selfish ego, biological makeup. It's the survival mechanism that wants you to survive, and
That goes
and I think that's why
to our caveman brains. And
exactly.
exactly.
And I think that's why there's very little discussion about the sociological consequences of it, because it's so driven by the ego, right? It's so like, ooh, I want that. To hell with everything else, even though it might bring about, the end of humanity, even if you can live, maybe not forever, but 500 years or so. I think that the consequences to society would be, well, potentially disastrous.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ask millennial. The boomers don't retire. Anyway, we can wrap it up, Mark. Thanks. This is very good. I'm get the that we're so close on so many of these.
Yes. Yes. Well, and it's just so great to have somebody on the podcast that thinks about these things deeply, because, as you've mentioned a couple times, it's, I use the term wacky because it's maybe esoteric is a better term, right? They're ideas that not too many people are thinking about, but as you mentioned, they need to be talked about, because they're coming down the pipeline, and there's no escape from these things. So you has to have some kind of strategies in place to deal with it at an individual level. And, maybe some people in power will listen to this or read your book, which we haven't mentioned, the Path to Singularity. So, definitely read it. I definitely will. Yeah, these are big, fundamental, civilization changing points that, need to be talked about.
That's my conviction. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Craig, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. It was a real pleasure. How can people reach out, find your book? Do you have a website, LinkedIn, Twitter? What's the best way?
Yeah, the book was just released 2 days ago. It's so happy. I'm a big fan of independent bookstores, and you should be able to find it or order it in an independent bookstore. But it's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, other places, I think. And I do have a website. If you just browse, I hesitate to call it Google, although that's a common verb, J. Craig Wheeler, it will come up. It's hosted by the Authors Guild.
Okay.
So I won't try to rattle off a URL, but I think
No, that's fine. I'll search for it and put it into the show notes. So
that would be wonderful. Thanks. Appreciate it.
perfect. Well, thanks again, Craig. It was great to talk about the singularity again. It's certainly something that keeps me up at night every now and then. And if I can pass on some sleepless nights to some other people and you as well, I think we're doing our job.
There you go. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Terrific. Well, thanks again. I appreciate
Yeah,
it.
thanks, Mark. Enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for listening to this week's Future Tech and Foresight podcast. If you like what you've heard here, there are, of course, a number of ways that you can support the podcast. The best way would be to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or give a rating on Spotify, which you can find a step-by-step explanation for on the futuretechandforesight.com website. Alternatively, feel free to leave a comment either on the episode show notes or the YouTube channel where you can see video recordings of the interviews. And finally, if you are part of an organization that is aware of the disruptive and transformational impact that emerging and future technologies will bring and want to know more, please get in touch to hear about the strategic foresight services that we offer and how we can help future-proof your organization and take advantage of the phenomenal opportunities available to survive and thrive in the future.
A lot of future-shocked people and future-shocked institutions in our society are simply overwhelmed.
Once there is superintelligence, the fate of humanity may depend on what the superintelligence does.
Science fact is catching up to science fiction.
The first truly intelligent machine will be the last invention that humanity needs to make.
The only scarcity that will exist in the future is that which we decide to create ourselves as humans.
Within a 10-year design revolution, we can have all humanity living the highest standard of living anybody's ever known.
Progress is accelerating at an exponential pace, and it's going to reach a point where
progress is so fast, it's going to be a singularity.
We are probably one of the last generations of Homo sapiens.
Every single headline points to the birth pangs of a Type 1 civilization.